And you know what that means? It's Sunday night service. And I'm Danny Williamson, and this is Dr. Aimee Apigian. Holy cow. I have been wanting to get her on here for God knows how long, but it just worked out that the last 2 weeks I had part one was talking about caring for a parent who never cared for you as she was dying, or caring for a parent as they're dying that never cared for you. And then part two last week. And now part three, we're going to end it with trauma work and the biology of trauma, or also you call it what? Transformation?
I call it trauma healing accelerated.
That's it. Trauma healing accelerated. And so, guys, when you all get on here, I want you to hit your heart buttons, hit your like button, share it on your Facebook, share it with your tribe, tell us where you're from, and post your questions. All right. Because this is going to be unbelievable. Dr. Apigian and I have been friends for now, I don't know, 4, 5, somewhere around there.
I was going to say, yeah, around
4 or 5 years. She is one of my favorites. She has stayed here at this house. Edwin loves her. If he knew she was on this video right now, he would be in here in my lap licking the screen because he loves her. He does. She was just here last month, right?
Yeah. And Edwin and I hit it off again. Like it was as if we were long lost lovers.
I know. He loves her. And so let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Aimee right now before we get into the nuts and bolts of trauma and all the things that she knows about this. But she's the founder and the CEO of Trauma Healing Accelerated, and she's most well known for bringing the biology of trauma to the fields of medicine and trauma. So she's combining this. She is double board certified with a double master's degree. She's a double board certified physician with a double master's degree in biochemistry and public health. She started, though, with 3.5 years of general surgery residency before did a 180. Is that right? 180? Yeah, 180. 360, you'd be back where you are. 180 career change path to preventative medicine, addiction medicine, and functional medicine with the goals of specializing in trauma, attachment, and addiction. She was a foster parent and adopted a 4-year-old little boy named Miguel during medical school. Jackson is in medical school right now. I cannot even imagine him adopting a child during medical school. During this time, she had her initiation into trauma and attachment, which ultimately changed the entire trajectory of her life and her career. She has hosted 3 annual online biology of trauma summits with over 200,000 registrants. I mean, can you believe that? She hosts the Biology of Trauma podcast. She was recently interviewed by is it Gabor Mate?
Gabor
Mate, highlighting her work and publicly endorsed by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, which is one of my all-time favorites, who wrote The Body Keeps Score. She and her work are the future of trauma. She has a very long bio, which we could get into, but we're not going to because you can read it on her website. I want you all to meet Dr. Aimee Apigian right now. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here. She's world renowned, guys. You have no idea what an honor and a blessing it is to have my friend Aimee on here. I'm so excited. Girl, thank you for taking the time tonight.
You are welcome. I love you. And I've watched you go through this with your mom. And if this is how I can support you and show you that I'm here for you, I'm honored to do this.
Well, I appreciate you. Do you have anything to say before we get into some questions that I have compiled over here for you that I think people are going to want to know about? Anything?
I'm excited to dive in.
Well, I just want to know. Okay, so tell me this. So, because I always talk about this, right? The body keeps score. The body remembers the tissues, the issues in the tissues, things like that. What does that really mean? I mean, what does it mean that our body stores trauma or that the body keeps score? What does it mean for the average person, for the average Joe?
Exactly. And that's actually a question that I had even coming out of medical school. I was not taught this. So I didn't know until again, I was working with Miguel. I could see that it had changed him as a person, and just going to therapy was not working. It wasn't resolving the experiences that were obviously affecting him to a great degree. And then when I found out, when I noticed that, wait a second, it's not just him, it's also me, that was really my initiation into, I have to understand how trauma has gotten stored in the body if I'm going to resolve it. Because I know this is as well for you. We are not people who just put band-aids on things. We want to live life well, which means we got to get to the root of things. And so when we talk about the body keeps the score, or trauma gets stored in the body, what we need to look at are the chronic effects that trauma has on the body. And I'm not sure that people really understand that there's a big difference between stress and trauma. Stress is something that we can actually recover from, and trauma crosses a line. And the body doesn't bounce back after trauma like it can after a stress. And you can think of it even just as going to the gym and exercising, right? So when we exercise, we are stressing our body. It's supposed to be a stress because stress can grow us. But if we go to the gym and we try to lift a weight that is far beyond our capacity, we will break a tendon. It will snap. You don't bounce back after breaking a tendon. It crossed the line. And so that line between stress and the trauma response are really important distinctions. Because now we're looking at, well, what happens then when that line is crossed? Well, the physiology of the body completely changes. There is a stress physiology, and then there is a trauma physiology. A lot of this comes from the work of Dr. Stephen Porges, where he brought us the polyvagal lens. And this is the understanding that the body has different operating systems. And the sympathetic is the operating system that is the stress response. And so it is high adrenaline, it is cortisol, it is movement, it is taking action. This is when we are angry. This is when we are anxious. Like, this is when we are doing something because we are compelled by all of our physiology and biology to do something. It's like the firefighter who's rushing towards the fire. They are in full stress mode. But just like being in the gym, if we get to a point where something all of a sudden feels too big for us, whoa, that just crossed a line. And when the body feels that something is too big for it, its response is to shut down in order to try to survive. Let me say that again. When the body senses that something is too big for it, it shuts down. All of our physiology changes. You can see this happening in nature. When you see a deer being chased by a cheetah, for example, or whatever animals you want to put in that scenario, as long as the deer thinks that it can still get away, it is going to run and run and run and run and run. And yet, the moment that it realizes that it cannot outrun this cheetah, again, this is too big for me. This is too much for me. I'm not enough. I'm not strong enough. I'm not smart enough. I can't outrun this. The deer actually shuts down before the cheetah ever actually touches it. And we've never really slowed down those videos enough to actually know that. We just assumed that it stopped running because it got pounced on. No, it gives up before it gets pounced on because it senses this is too much for me. And it's the same thing with our physiology. When we sense that something is too much for us, we shut down. And we meaning our body. Our body shuts down. And we can feel that internal collapse. It's very uncomfortable, but we can feel our energy drain. So let me give you a real life example. Just this week, actually. Tuesday evening, I had a conversation. You know some of the background of this. I had a conversation with someone, and I thought that everything was fine. I thought that that I was going to be okay. I knew this was coming. This was expected. Like, I thought that everything should be fine. But when I went to get up from that conversation, Danny, I noticed that my body had lost all of its energy. I almost fell down because my legs were weak and they were shaking. And I was like, whoa. I mean, me knowing all of this stuff, right? Like, I can go to a curiosity place. I can go to, wow, look at that. My mind thought that everything should be fine. And yet my body has a different story about it. My body says that felt too hard for me. That emotion, that all of that, whatever that represents, that felt too hard for me. And if that's just a conversation that I had over the phone with someone, imagine all the times in our life where at that moment for our body, it overwhelmed us. Whether it was internal shame that overwhelmed us, whether it was internal embarrassment, whether it was abandonment, whether it was chronic neglect from a mother who just didn't know how to be present for you and care for you. It doesn't matter the specific details. It's just this experience of, for our body, it was way too much to carry that heavy burden, and it shut down in the process.
Unbelievable. So that was your awareness today. But what about people? How does trauma manifest itself, right? How would a person know they have stored trauma in their body?
Yeah, so
I
here's what
always say,
happens.
oh, you got autoimmune disease. I mean, things like this happen. How would a person know they have stored trauma? Now they know they have trauma, right? Like I know I had childhood trauma, but how do people know they have stored trauma?
There are several different ways to know if you have stored trauma. One, Danny, would be that if you know that you've had at least one experience like this where you got overwhelmed, it was too much for you at that time to process it, to understand it. And what happens is that since we are not taught how to complete these responses of our body, we block them. And when things do not get completed, when things do not get resolved, they just get stored. And so stored trauma means unresolved trauma. Let me say that again. Stored trauma means unresolved trauma. So if there are any experiences in your life where you don't feel like there was a resolution to that, you don't feel like you processed it, you don't feel like you completed that experience, there's elements of it that still bother you, there's elements of it that still trigger you, there's elements of it that still make you sad, make you mad, whatever it is, unresolved trauma becomes stored in the body because the body went into a physiology of trauma. It wasn't just our mind that went there, that we just need to talk about it and resolve it that way. Like, the body went into a trauma place. The body went into a trauma physiology. And unless we have done the work and know how to take our body and move it through that and come out the other side, it gets stuck there because it doesn't get completed. It doesn't get resolved. And that then becomes stored trauma. And what happens is that it starts to change our biology. And so now stored trauma is the biggest cause of stress. It becomes the biggest cause of ongoing triggers. It becomes the ongoing cause for us keeping our guard up, of us holding back, of us staying small, of us lashing out. It becomes the reason for all of these stressors in our life, simply because of the fears and the cells even are stuck in a survival place because it didn't get that completion and that resolution. And so over years, and now you're talking decades for many people, right?
Yes.
Especially if something happened in childhood and we haven't known how to resolve it. We've been carrying that trauma for decades. And now it's causing digestive issues, sleep issues. It's causing immune problem issues. It's causing cognition issues. It's causing hormone imbalances because it becomes the operating system for our body. And so when there are multiple things that are happening, that's always a sign of, there's actually one root cause to that. And that's our nervous system is in a state of survival, not that you actually have 5 or 10 different things wrong with you. It's what's driving all of that. What's the root that is sprouting all of those branches of the tree? And when we really look at what system of the body drives our health, it's the nervous system. Right. We can either be in parasympathetic state, which is what I call calm aliveness, which is always going to drive you towards a state of health, or you can be in survival and trauma state. And that will always drive a person to more and more symptoms, diseases, and then diagnoses over time. So there are some specific diagnoses that are related to trauma, and yet we also know that any chronic symptom, any chronic disease is always going to be related to a nervous system stuck in a trauma physiology and going back and forth between stressed and then overwhelmed, stressed and overwhelmed. Dr. Robert Scaer wrote an amazing book. He was one of the leaders in identifying this with IBS. So irritable bowel syndrome, where the digestive system is just off. Like it can't seem to make it up its mind about what it's doing. And some people can have more diarrhea. Some people can have constipation, but it's just this syndrome. IBS, it was like a syndrome of these symptoms that just are, I just have pain, bloating. I don't know what's wrong. I never seem to have resolution. There always seems to be some inflammation. Like this, he identified that was most related to the nervous system going back and forth between this stress and overwhelm state. Stress and overwhelm, stress and overwhelm. And it's the fluctuation of those that is really driving those symptoms. And when you think of most people living on the planet today, is that not what we do? We go back and forth between stress and then I'm overwhelmed. No, I need to get doing something. So I'm going to drink some more caffeine and I'm going to be stressed now. Oh, and this just overwhelmed me. So now I'm going to eat the bag of potato chips and eat the chocolate and binge watch movies. And I've got to get stressed because I've got to do stuff again. And so we go back and forth between stress and overwhelm. And that is the hallmark of stored trauma in the body.
Isn't that something? And that's exactly what happened to me. Mine was the irritable bowel syndrome, right? I was diagnosed at 24 colonoscopies before I was 44, endoscopy, barium minimus, chronic diarrhea started, not long after being molested, a little bit after that, but then getting beat to a bloody pulp by a stepfather. And then just living in all kinds of just chaos growing up. And so mine manifested itself in the gut. Mine was irritable bowel syndrome. But do different types of traumas manifest differently in the body? Do they get stored differently? I don't know. That's what happened to me with the IBS, but are there other traumas that get stored differently in the body?
Yeah. And that's such a great question, Danny. And so many people ask me this because they say, well, I specifically had sexual trauma, or I specifically had a car accident, or I specifically was bullied in school. And when we look at the trauma response, for me, that has been the most helpful in my own life and working with the thousands of people now, is being able to say the trauma response is the most important thing for us to recognize. Let me say that again. The trauma response is the most important thing for us to recognize, not the actual event.
Okay.
And that event created a trauma response at that time. But if you notice, you're still going into that trauma response all the time now, because you're noticing that you are getting overwhelmed now in your life. And so the trauma response is what we work with. Long before we ever work around a specific event, we need to work with the trauma response that's still currently happening in your life today. And so that is where a lot of people get hung up, is that they're thinking of one or maybe a few events in their life that were the trauma. And I'm going to say, actually, the trauma is not the event. The trauma is what is ongoing in your body as the response to that event.
Ooh, that's huge. Say that again. I'm going to
Trauma
type
is
that
actually
up.
not the event. And we know that because two people can go through the same event, can grow up in the same family. And for one person, that family was traumatizing. And for the other person, they were like, oh yeah, that was stressful. We had, our family dynamics, and they're not traumatized though. And
Yes.
so, and even two people can go out to war and be in the military. One come back with PTSD and another not. So it's never the event. The event itself is not the trauma. The trauma was the fact that we went through that and we felt alone. The trauma was that we went through that and felt lost. The trauma was that we went through that at a time when we did not have the resources to understand it, to process it, to move through that experience. And so the trauma is actually our internal response that happened, where my body shut down. Whereas if my body had not shut down and it had stayed as a stress response, it never would have been a trauma for me. But the fact that it happened and I was all alone and no one understood me and no one helped me process it and understand it, then that's why my body was like, this is too much for me. I don't even know where to start to process this. I'm only 5 years old, or I'm only 7 years old. How am I supposed to even understand all of this chaos around me? I'm just going to shut down to survive. So the trauma is actually what happens inside of us in response to that event, because it was never just the event. It was also the context around the event. I don't know if that makes sense.
Gee, so Pete, yes, it makes incredible sense. I mean, do we have a lot of, the bulk of my practice is the bulk of it is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. So Hashimoto's, and then I have a ton of gut, which is all connected, it's all intermingled in there. But I've always thought that, a lot of these trauma patients, because so many of my patients have got high adverse childhood experience scores, they've got high ACE scores. And I always think about the trauma and them losing their voice, right? They lose their voice during this trauma, or they couldn't speak up. I don't know. Do we have research on that, like specific areas, like the thyroid?
Like
I
the
mean,
thyroid. Well, all right. So let's
wonder.
go deeper into this. Let's go deeper into this, because I want to open people's minds beyond the ACE score. So ACE is the
Yes.
adverse childhood experiences. And while a high ACE score has been associated with all autoimmune conditions like Hashimoto's, there are also just as many people with a 0 ACE score who have Hashimoto's.
Yes.
So what about them? And here's what we need to understand about trauma to understand this phenomenon, is that there are so many more traumas that happen outside of what is measured on the ACE score.
You bet.
And when we understand that trauma, and here's my definition of trauma, here it comes. Trauma is anything that for any reason at that time overwhelmed us. Anything. And so when you look at autoimmunity is actually associated with trauma. So an experience of overwhelm within the first year of our life, Danny.
Oh, yeah.
Who even has memory of their first year of life? I mean, I don't know. I mean, you've got a great brain, so maybe you do.
No, I don't. No,
So
but
when we look at, well, what could possibly be a trauma for a 1-year-old when my parents were good parents, right? Like we know some of your mom struggles around intimacy and connection, but what about for someone who thinks that that wasn't part of their childhood? When we look at so many common parenting practices like cry it out when you go to sleep, that would have happened in the first year of life. And here you are, 3 months old, 6 months old, 9 months old. You don't understand the world yet. You don't understand that your parent is just trying to help you be able to sleep alone and not keep them up awake at night. And so here you are, you're scared. You can't move because you haven't even learned how to crawl and move around yet. You've been completely abandoned by the one person who you know can help you and help you process and survive the world. Talk about scared, alone, lost, and full panic. Like you don't know if you're going to survive this if you fall asleep. And so you cry and cry and cry, and no one comes. Would that not be overwhelming for you at that time of your life? Well, yes, right? Like
Yeah.
as adults, we can look back and be like, well, of course they were doing that. But at that time, right? Trauma is anything for any reason at that time in our life, with the understanding that we had, with the resources that we had, at that time overwhelmed us. And so there are many people who think that they had good parents, like that is their story, and yet they have an autoimmune condition which is always a reflection of such early trauma that they don't even remember it.
Right.
And we're not looking for big events, you guys. Like we're looking for moments where, as a very young infant child, you experienced such overwhelm. And in the case of Hashimoto's, here you are crying and crying and crying. And then you finally realize my voice means nothing.
Yes.
My voice means nothing. So
You know,
why
it's
am I
a
even going to
miracle.
try?
Yeah, it's a miracle I didn't lose my thyroid. You know,
It's a miracle you didn't lose your thyroid.
miracle. I think because I was such a loud mouth, even as a kid, even with trauma, even getting molested, even getting beat up, I was ornery. I mean, I was vocal. I was vocal, always vocal. But I manifested all of mine right here, right
Right
there.
there. Yeah.
You know, isn't
And
that something?
And that's not surprising, because what we understand about the trauma response. So when I talk about that shutdown, right? Like that's the trauma physiology. That's the trauma response, is when we feel our body shutting down, drained of energy. What communicates that to the body is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve actually either communicates parasympathetic and calm aliveness and health, or the message coming down the vagus nerve can be one of, let's shut everything down. It's the same nerve, but it depends on which train is leaving which station. Is it the parasympathetic, what we call ventral vagal train, or is it the trauma, the dorsal vagal train? And so when we think of the vagus nerve and where it goes, it ends all in the digestive system. And so everything subdiaphragmatic, below the diaphragm always takes a hit, always takes a hit. That's why everyone with stored trauma has some degree of leaky gut, has some degree of decreased detoxification system, lymphatic flow, because this is what happens below the diaphragm, because the vagus nerve is communicating to everything. Shut down. Just do the bare minimum to survive.
Good Lord. Isn't that something?
Isn't that
It's
something?
fascinating. Isn't that something? So I've got patients, and just like me, who've been in therapy for years, years, and you know, I don't know that I have that many triggers anymore, but I mean, are there okay, so what kind of therapies what do you recommend? I don't know. I mean, I have patients who say, I don't know, I've been in therapy forever and I'm just still a big mess as I was, you know, 15 years ago. What are your thoughts about that? What are we doing wrong? Where are we missing the boat? Where are we missing the boat?
We're trying to resolve trauma in our head
Oh,
and forgetting the body. That's where we're going wrong.
yeah. Every
And
therapist I've ever had, and I've done experiential therapy. I went a week at Onsite, and Onsite did a great job for me. I mean, they really did, getting back to the original trauma in my life that I remembered. Now I know more, but you know, yeah, but I've never had anyone connect it. The body and the brain, the body and the head.
well, yeah. And if you're, how do you know if you're doing a therapy that's using your head? You're either talking about it, because when we talk, we have to access our brain, right? Whereas when we actually access traumas in the body, there are no words for that, Danny. There are no words. Like the body doesn't use words to communicate. So it's so cool to work with someone and work with their body, because we don't have to rely on words. And, I'll ask them, like, what's coming up for you right now? I notice something big is happening. And they just kind of stare at me like, I don't even know how to explain this to you. And that's where I'm like, perfect. Then you're doing exactly what your body needs you to do. There are not going to be any words for this because the body does not use words to communicate. So if we're using words, we're up in our head. If we're journaling, we're up in our head. Like, most therapy has been based on the brain, and that's not where trauma is stored. It's in the body.
Good Lord. Okay, keep talking. I'm going to share that right now. Most therapies are based on the brain, but that's not where trauma is stored.
No. And so that's why people can be in therapy for decades and not be actually accessing where this is stored. So they're not reaching the resolution that they need. And that's most what the body wants. And the body will actually create scenarios, create messages for us, communicating with us like, I need help. I need resolution for all of this stored trauma. You're not listening. Let me help you get sick so that you can listen to me. You're still not listening to me. Okay, let me do this. Let me get worse. Let me get louder. When our body is getting sick, that is a message of, I need resolution of all this burden that I'm carrying. And we tend to only focus on the medical when our body gets sick. And when we need to go do trauma, we go focus on the brain. Like, we've been missing a lot. So how do we work with the body, right? So I have found that there are 3 essential elements to working with the body for bringing resolution to trauma. And first, we have to lay a foundation of what I'm going to call regulation. Now, you've been in the medical practice for a long time, so you're going to understand the word homeostasis. Regulation is like homeostasis. It's this ability to have a level of stability, have a level of, even if things are a little uncomfortable, it's not unmanageable. I'm not falling apart. And so we need to create a foundation of regulation for us to even be able to process traumas. And that's why our bodies will often block the therapies that we're trying to do. And we can go to therapy and then we feel sick. We feel tired. We have a flare up of our Hashimoto's. Why? Because our body was telling us that what you just tried to do was too much for me. You're trying to move me beyond my current capacity for homeostasis, for regulation. We're not ready for that. And so we actually cannot process trauma safely without this foundation of regulation. So that's the first step. And how do we start to build that foundation of regulation? We need to use things like somatic work. And somatic, really, like the Latin word somatic, means tissues. And we need to learn not just how to connect with our body, but we need to learn how to hear the messages from our body and respond to those messages. So I lead people through a 21-day journey, for example, where we learn how to listen to the sensations of our body. And I'm teaching them how to create the regulation, create a felt sense of safety, because that's what we need for regulation, create a felt sense of security, support, and create a felt sense of safe expansion so that I can safely move into joy. I can safely move into grief. I can safely move into these areas without losing my balance. And so we've got to create that foundation, and we do that through learning to hear these messages and learning how to create these felt experiences for ourselves. Most people, sadly, go through their whole life and die still never feeling fully safe in their body.
Wow.
And that's where we need to start. That's where we have to start. And we can learn how to do that for ourselves with exercises that don't take any more than 2 minutes. When we learn the principles of the nervous system and what it needs, it's actually quite simple and easy to create for ourselves a felt sense of safety, safe enough. Create a felt sense of being supported, that felt sense of someone's got my back, right? Like, we're actually undoing the trauma experience where I felt unsafe and I felt alone, unsupported. And so we now as adults, no one is coming to save us. We have got to learn how to create these experiences for ourselves. And so many of us have tried to do that with affirmations, with mantras, and that is all back up in our brains. And our body doesn't believe it. Our body's like, yeah, you can think whatever you want, brain, but I know the truth. I know that I'm not safe. And so it's actually created a further disconnect between our brain and our body. And that's what creates so much of the disease as well, is this big disconnect where we try to use our brains to get our bodies to perform, get our bodies to do things, to function at a certain level. And then when it doesn't, we get mad at it. And so we've got to be able to understand that our body has a different story than our brain. Our bodies have a story of, I'm not safe. I'm not safe. I'm trying to figure this thing called life out, and it's a scary world. I don't feel safe. And so we have to actually start with creating for ourselves a felt sense of safety, a felt sense of support, a felt sense of security, and then we can start to process traumas. And as we look at regulation from the nervous system standpoint, we have to also address the chronic effects of trauma on our biology. And so by this point, we've carried this trauma for so long that it has likely caused nutritional deficiencies. It's likely caused magnesium deficiency. Magnesium deficiency is one of the most common deficiencies in the Western world. Magnesium, of all things. And yet when you realize how many reactions use up magnesium, and so those of us who have had chronic stress because of our stored trauma, we are all magnesium deficient. And as long as our cells are deficient in anything, Danny, deficiency is a survival state. I don't have enough. And so we can't ask our body to come out of a survival state until we have addressed all of its deficiencies, whether emotional deficiencies or nutritional deficiencies. So that's where I bring in the biology piece and I say, all right, you guys, doing the therapy is not enough. Yes, you need to do the somatic work. Yes, you need to learn these different parts of you, that little girl part of you, that protector part of you that keeps the walls up. You've got to learn those parts of you, learn how to befriend them. And we've got to look at the most common nutritional deficiencies. We've got to look at the most common biochemical imbalances that are a result of trauma that are now keeping your cells and your body in a survival state, no matter how much therapy you do.
Good Lord. This is amazing. This is, well, I've never, and I've known you for so long, but I've never, and I know about your 21-day journey and all the things that you do, even deeper than that, all the deep dive stuff. But I've just never sat down with you to really, really bring it down to the head and the body and the tissues and the micronutrient deficiencies. It's all connected.
It
And
is.
no one is doing this work, guys. You all listen to me, tribe. I am telling you, no one is doing this work. She is a groundbreaker on this. And it's fascinating because I knew her before she really honed it in, right? Really narrowed down to this is my niche. This is what I'm doing. And so we do have a lot of talk therapies and somatic. You think we need to do that. We need to do talk therapy. I mean, we need to do that. And then we need to get in with someone like you and join a program like you that you do. What is your program? What is your program called? I shared the link to your website, and on your website, you have the link to the program, correct?
I do. On my website, I have a place there where people can see the foundational journey. That's where they would start. We've got to create that foundation of regulation first. And then we do these deeper dives where I integrate everything. I integrate the biology, the somatic work, the parts work in order for us to, start to bring resolution and healing and inner peace.
And it's possible, people. It is possible. I was going to share with you right here. I've got a good friend of mine. This is the friend I was telling you that texted me this morning. I'm so looking forward to this. I'm taking your class, Dr. Apigian. She's already signed up for the 21 days. She sent me a text message. I showed you today.
Look forward to it, Mary. Look forward to it.
Mary's a keeper, man. She's something. So, and yes, Carrie, she actually did address a little part of this, right? Is the amygdala part of the part of storing trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question because there is a lot of focus on the amygdala and the limbic system, right? And all you need to do is limbic retraining. No, that is not true. So we have something that's called neuroception. And neuroception is this idea that our nervous system is what gathers information from our environment. And that environment includes our external environment. We gather information through our eyes, through our nose, through touch, but it also gathers information from our internal environment, especially from our gut. We know that everything in the gut is going up the vagus nerve to the brain. So that is neuroception. And it's similar to perception, right? Where I perceive this in my environment, but neuroception is on a subconscious level. And it's that information that's coming into the amygdala. So it's not that the amygdala is the problem. The amygdala is just doing its job of reacting to the information that it's getting. And the information that it's getting is saying, hey, we're not safe. And so the amygdala is literally getting that message all the time because our nervous system is wired to not feel safe. Our cells are in a state of deficiency. And so that's the message that's coming from our cells up the nerves into the amygdala. And so then the amygdala is just doing its job of reacting and keeping our sympathetic system turned on.
Yes.
So it's not that the amygdala is the problem. The amygdala is just receiving the information, and the information is what is missing reality, where everything is actually fine. But our nervous system is wired to perceive danger even when there is no danger now. And our cells are so much in a state of deficiency and survival. And so that's the message that the amygdala is constantly getting. So it will not be enough to just do limbic rewiring or retraining. We've got to actually go down to the cellular level and say, how can I resource you? What do you need? How can I support you? And then that's where we're looking at being able to integrate the body work, the parts work, the biology work in order to shift on a cellular level our body out of survival state. And then the amygdala can finally relax. But as long as it's getting a signal of we're in danger, it's going to continue sending our system into sympathetic.
Unbelievable, isn't it? Wow. Yeah, Mary's is severe depression and anxiety, and it is debilitating. It's fascinating because she's always been low energy. Isn't that something?
I'm
Yeah,
not
Mary's
surprised.
got a story.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
She has a story. And April, I'm late to this one. She talked about that, how you unstore the trauma. And, and again, she has a 21-day program that is fantastic, but it's not just talk therapy. It's all of it.
It's not even any talk therapy for that program.
No. And it's getting your body. Wow. It's fascinating to me. PTSD caused, what does it say? Some of it from being attacked by family and by authorities because of who they are and who they have to keep quiet and not tell the things that they have done, which I might add are 1,000,000% horrible law break. Oh, goodness. Learn never to be threatened and blackmailed to keep quiet because it doesn't stop them from harming you anyway. Huge mistake. Yes. Yes. Wow. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, overwhelmed, right? Just being overwhelmed by that experience.
Look at this. Blocking it out. Could you have completely blocked it out and have no recollection of it, but still show signs mentally and physically? Tammy, that's a good question right there.
Yes. And that is called either repression or suppression.
Oh,
and we are so masterful at surviving life that if that's what our brain and body decide that they need to do to help us survive, that is what they do. So repressing something means that we kind of know it's there, but we are doing our best to avoid feeling it, talking about it, thinking about it. We numb it with food. There's a whole list of coping mechanisms that we can use to not feel things. And that would be repressing. But suppressing is when we have suppressed it so well that we're not even consciously aware of it. And that is really when it shows up as physical health issues, where there's no voice for it. There's no expression for it. And so the body is even more feeling alone and unsupported and trying to get our attention. And there are many people who don't even remember large parts of their childhood. It's just not there. And we don't need to know the stories. We don't need to have those memories to be able to start to work with the body. Because again, what we're working with is not the event in the past. We're working with how that trauma response is showing up in our life right now, today, present moment. And as we work on that, it starts to build our capacity to see more, to hold more. And then our body is able to process things that it's never been able to process before. And so for me, that's
Yeah,
that's a big
fascinating.
hope. Mm-hmm.
And so much therapy, every therapy I've ever been in focuses on the past,
It
on the
does.
trauma.
Yeah.
Isn't that something?
That's hurtful. It's actually hurtful. It's actually really
Oh,
hurtful.
and I think EMDR probably is good. I don't know, but yeah, that's hurtful. Let me tell you about that. I mean, yeah, anybody's ever done EMDR, living through that trauma, right? Recreating that trauma as in a safe place, supposedly, but I don't get triggered very often about things. That was a hard one. That was real hard for me,
Well,
EMDR.
Danny, I mean, what we know, and this is what Bessel wrote in his book, The Body Keeps the Score. When our brain goes to that story, guess what follows? Our body. So we can't actually think about that story without our body re-experiencing it. And so if it wasn't bad enough to have it have happened one time, we all by ourselves have recreated and re-traumatized our body time and time again.
Yes.
That is why when I lead people through this 21-day journey, this is not the time that we're going to go into the past stories. We're not ready for that. Our body's not ready for that. We have got to learn how to stay in the present moment and renegotiate the past event, but not leave the present moment and go into the past. We've got to be able to do this in a way that our body is not re-traumatized. And anytime that we go into that past story, you can feel it in your body. It gets heavy, right? We want to go into that collapse and shame posture. The body
Yes.
goes with us. And so this is why it's hurtful. This is why it really has been hurtful for many people in therapy is, yeah, they're revisiting past events and their body is getting re-traumatized every time we do that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I never thought of it like that. April says, I don't remember anything good from childhood, just bad and trauma. I don't know why I can't remember the good. April, I remember some good, but I'm right there with you. I remember mainly bad. I don't have I don't have a lot of memories of childhood. Not a lot. I don't know. Maybe this is normal. I don't know. I don't know.
My favorite line, Danny, that I share with people as soon as they start taking the 21-day journey with me is, isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Right? Because it's all it is just information. It's just information.
It's
I
just
can't remember
information.
much of my childhood. Well, isn't that interesting? That your
Yes.
body doesn't feel safe to access much of your childhood.
Oh,
Well, I don't
yeah.
remember much good from my childhood. Yeah, isn't that interesting? That your body went through so much. It just seems to have bad memories from our childhood. Isn't that interesting? Like there's a message there for us from our body. Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? Observe
Yeah.
it and
Observe
let's
it.
work on it. And yes, April, it is on Zoom.
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Mm-hmm.
And she does a fantastic job. I know that because I've seen her firsthand in and out when we were in Florida together and we stayed together in Florida and she was here and I would be in and out zipping around going to the beach and Amy's working. She's leading things and doing things. And yes, it is on Zoom and she does a phenomenal job. Like I've never sat down and listened, but I've been in and out. And so and do you run this 21-day? Is it all the time? It's up and running? They can sign up for
I'm
it.
actually just finishing one right now. So
Okay.
we are on day 19 of this 21-day journey. The next one will be March. And I do lead these group classes every day for 21 days. So people have a 10-minute exercise that they do on their own every day. I guide them through an exercise for those 10 minutes. They fit that in their schedule wherever they want. And then I go live twice a day. I teach the exact same thing so that people can just show up whichever time works best for them. But they have two options. And we have a live class where I safely guide them. This is my commitment to them. This is how important it is for me to show up every day. So yes, even when I'm traveling, I show up every
I
day,
know
twice
she's
a
done
day,
it with me twice. We've
safely
stayed
guide them.
together and she's done it. But I want you all to know something, guys, that it's very unusual to have a provider who does this live for sure. Now, okay, so this doesn't start until March because I just had a trigger up in me when you said March. I was like, what are you talking about? March? I want to wait till March. What do you mean? Is there anything else or what? Do we really have to? I know we have to wait till March for the 21 days, but what else do you have? Do you have anything else online
I
that's
do.
already recorded that
Yeah,
people
no,
can get started on
I
now?
do. For those people with, especially with chronic health conditions, I have put together 7 of the most helpful somatic exercises. And those are on demand. Those are already recorded on video so people can get started with that. I can send that link to you later, Danny.
Okay.
But yes, that's a helpful thing that people can get started with. And then get on my newsletter because I'm sending out emails every week with helpful resources and information. And I don't know if there's enough people, I will run a 21-day journey before March.
Well, there you go. So you can message her, guys, because you guys this tribe is loyal and they are true. And you never know, maybe she'll do something before March. If not, March will be here before we know it. So Aimee, I appreciate you more than you will ever know. You absolutely rocked it tonight. And I'm looking at all the comments on here and I can't wait to read everything when I get off here. But you thank you. Is there anything else that you want to say? I would love to do it before March, eh? Mary says. Yeah, me too. Oh, well, look, wait here. One more. All right, Candy, you're the last question. Do you have any thoughts on generational trauma? I got lots of thoughts about it, but mine aren't scientific. So let's listen to it.
I've got lots of thoughts too. Here's what we know about generational trauma. It is both passed on in our biology and in our nervous system. So a mother passes on her nervous system to her child. And this is not genetic, right? So there are different tendencies that people will be like, well, it runs in family, so it must be genetic. No, like this is just your family and how they've learned to interact with each other. And when there is a disconnect in that interaction, that disconnect, that pattern of disconnect, that pattern of avoidance, whatever that pattern is, that gets passed on because that's what we absorb when we're children. So there will always be the generational trauma of nervous system stuff. And that's why it's so important for us to do our own work, do our own work, and be able to kind of have repair with our adult children if our children have already grown up and we know that we passed on some trauma to you. Sorry about that. The other way in which generational trauma is passed on is through epigenetics.
Yes.
So epigenetics is not just genetics. It is how our DNA is read. And this is so fascinating because it goes back 3 generations. And what were our great grandparents going through and the stressors? Maybe they were in a war, and that causes oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is one of the biomarkers of stored trauma in our body. And that oxidative stress accumulates around our DNA, overwhelms our DNA's ability to repair, and then we start having epigenetic changes, and those get passed on. And so there are multiple ways in which generational trauma gets passed on, but those are the 2 main ones: is epigenetics. So our biology, we've got to work on our biology, you guys, and the habits, the patterns of relationship and connection that get passed on from our parents, who got it from their parents, who got it from their parents, until someone breaks the cycle.
I'm breaking it. I broke it. I'm breaking it. I'm just telling you, broke it, been working on it. I am not going through that. I just was talking about that today to somebody. I'm breaking that generational trauma, and every single one of us can. Every single one of you on here can. So I have kept you for 54 minutes, and I know you're tired out there in California. And so I appreciate you more than you'll ever know. Guys, give her some love. Hit your heart buttons, hit your like buttons, share this. As soon as this is over, go to her website, click the link, sign up for her newsletter, and sign up for her 21-day challenge. And who knows? Um, maybe we'll do something before March. And Mary, we're going to end it on that one. I am breaking it as well. Let's break the generational trauma and the curse. And guys, listen, this is Thanksgiving week. It is my favorite week of the year. I'm working Monday and Tuesday, and then Wednesday I'm cooking, and I've got all the people coming here. But Friday, Black Friday, Amy's been to my store, so she knows. Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, Sunday's a bonus, Cyber Monday, and Giving Tuesday. And we're giving to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention this year. Those are the 5 biggest days of the year for this single mom, woman-owned business over there. So I'm going to put the link up here for the online store for those of you that don't live close. But we have so much going on for you all for those 5 days. This is the one day of the year that, or the 1 week of the year, I'm sorry, 5 days, that everything is on sale. Everything, you name it, it's on sale. And we are loading it up. And I'm hoping Giving Tuesday that we can give a lot of money to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. But Cyber Monday, you all broke the internet last year, by the way, for us. Like our Shopify shut down. But all that being said, so Black Friday, we open at 9 a.m. Jackson is in town from medical school. Yeah, I'm so excited. He'll be working Friday and Saturday at the office. He'll actually be all week. But November 27th, Cyber Monday, Dr. Anna Kabecka is flying in from Texas that day. She is going to be at the store in person, 5 to 7 p.m. for an in-person event on hormones, menopause, perimenopause, all the things, talking about Mighty Maca, talking about her Julva vaginal rejuvenation, which plumps that vagina back up to your 20s and 30s. Who doesn't want that? And balance cream and all that. But we're going to be having a sips and sups. We're going to have clean crafted wine. Dr. Anna Kabecka, the girlfriend doctor, OBGYN. Aimee and I've been friends with her for years as well. She's going to be in the store. So I want you all there 5 to 7 p.m. All right, guys, there's no Sunday night service next Sunday night because it's all the things going on that day. So I appreciate you. Get on her email, man. There's our, oh, well, you can't do anything with this. There's our online store right there. Amy's got an online store as well. So go to her website, read it. You guys are going to love her. She's my favorite. There's nobody better.
Mwah.
Mwah. Love you. We ran a
Love
little
you.
bit over, but you guys have a fantastic Sunday night, and it's Thanksgiving weekend. You know what? I am so grateful for every single one of you. 9 years, my business has been in business. I'm old. I'm 57. So I've been 9 years plugging away. Wrote a book 2 years ago. By the way, when are you writing the book?
I just signed my book contract. So I'm delivering my manuscript in February 1st, and my book will come out then early 2025.
I am so excited. Guys, it's going to be a bestseller. And Dee Dee, I said we were ending on Mary, but we're not. She says, thank you both so much. I'm watching from my childhood home to take care of my dad, and it's been a trip. My brother said yesterday he feels like we're kids again. Yeah, that's right. Well, Dee Dee and I went to school together. Deidre and I went to school together. So happy Thanksgiving candy to you. And yes, Mary, we're ending it on you. Yes, we are, because that is amazing. She got a book deal. All right, guys. Love you. Appreciate you. We'll see you next week. Or no,